When Vladimir Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the world held its breath. Many hoped the war would remain confined to Ukraine's borders. But now, years later, the conflict is spilling outward, crossing invisible red lines that were never supposed to be crossed. The Spark drones, small, unmanned aircraft that have become one of Russia's favorite weapons. But when those drones began entering the airspace of NATO countries, the entire security order of Europe shifted overnight. Poland, one of NATO's frontline states, suddenly found itself under aerial threat. And in response, Warsaw made a demand that could reshape the war. It's time for NATO to close the skies over Ukraine. On September 10th, Poland's air defense radars lit up with something unusual. Multiple unidentified flying objects were crossing into Polish territory. Within moments, the Polish military scrambled its F-16 fighter jets. The alert quickly spread across NATO's integrated defense network. Dutch F-35s roared into the skies. Awed, Italy dispatched an AWACS surveillance plane to monitor the situation. A NATO refueling aircraft was also deployed to keep jets in the air longer. When the dust settled, Poland confirmed that 19 drones had crossed its borders. At least 3 were shot down while the others vanished. None carried explosives. But one crashed into the home of a Polish pensioner, Tomasz Wesolowski. His roof collapsed, his bedroom destroyed. Luckily, he was downstairs watching the news, ironically, coverage of the very same drone incursion. When the debris struck, for Poland, this wasn't just an accident, it was a direct violation of sovereignty. Prime Minister Donald Tusk declared it the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II. So why send drones into Poland? Analysts believe it was a deliberate test by Putin. These weren't armed drones, but decoys. Their purpose was simple: to measure NATO's reaction time, to probe its defenses, and to see whether the alliance would stand firm or hesitate. Poland didn't hesitate. Warsaw immediately called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. European allies rushed to pledge support. Germany promised to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. The Netherlands and the Czech Republic offered anti-drone defenses. France deployed Rafale fighter jets. The United States, however, reacted more cautiously. Then President Donald Trump simply posted on social media, "What s? With Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones, here we go." But beyond that remark, Washington held back, leaving Europeans uneasy about how far America was willing to go in an actual confrontation. Just days later, the situation escalated further. On September 14th, another NATO state, Romania, reported a Russian drone violation. This time, the drone was a Geran. Russia's version of the Iranian Shat-136, Romanian jets tracked it as it strayed, roughly 20 kilometers into NATO airspace before disappearing from radar. Though it caused no damage, the symbolism was clear. The war was no longer confined to Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called it an obvious and deliberate expansion of the war. In less than a week, Russian drones had breached the skies of 2 NATO members. That fact alone raised the stakes enormously. Poland's patience had run out. Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski spoke to German media, laying down a dramatic proposal. It is time to consider a no-fly zone over Ukraine. If we can destroy drones there, we protect Poland, Romania, and all of Europe. He didn't use the words outright, but the message was obvious. Poland wanted NATO to take a step that had always been considered too risky: directly engaging Russian aircraft and drones over Ukraine. But Sikorski also acknowledged a hard truth. Poland couldn't do this alone. It would require a united NATO decision. And, crucially, Ukraine itself would need to consent. Calls for a no-fly zone aren't new. From the first weeks of the war, Ukrainian leaders begged for NATO to close the skies. Each time, the alliance refused. The reason: risk of escalation. A no-fly zone isn't just a declaration, it's an active military operation. It means NATO jets patrolling Ukraine 24/7, ready to shoot down Russian aircraft, drones, and even missiles. One mistake, one downed Russian jet, could drag NATO into open war with Moscow. There are also legal hurdles. Technically, a no-fly zone must be authorized by the UN Security Council. But Russia sits on that council and wields veto power. Any proposal would be dead on arrival. Still, history offers precedents. The US and allies imposed no-fly zones over Iraq in the 1990s without UN approval. In Bosnia and Libya, zones were enforced with UN backing. But Ukraine is different. Here the opponent isn't Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, it's nuclear-armed Russia. Let's imagine NATO went ahead anyway. What would a no-fly zone over Ukraine look like? Experts suggest two possibilities. A full-scale zone, covering all Ukrainian skies not under Russian occupation. NATO jets would constantly patrol, engaging any Russian aircraft or drone. This would be massive in scale and extremely risky. Limited zone, focused on western and northern Ukraine, near NATO borders. The goal would be to intercept drones before they cross into Poland or Romania. Smaller in scope, but still dangerous. Either option would require enormous resources. Advanced radar systems, air defense batteries, constant aerial patrols, and coordination across dozens of countries. And then comes the cost question. Russian drones are cheap, sometimes only tens of thousands of dollars. NATO interceptors, by contrast, can cost hundreds of thousands, even millions per missile. Shooting down swarms of drones could drain NATO stockpiles faster than Russia can build new ones. But beyond cost, there is the danger of escalation. Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's former president and now one of Putin's most aggressive voices, warned that Moscow would treat any NATO aircraft in Ukrainian skies as targets. That's the kind of rhetoric that keeps NATO leaders cautious. So here's the dilemma. Doing nothing means more Russian drones might cross into NATO airspace, testing the alliance again and again. Public pressure in Poland, Romania, and the Baltics will grow louder, demanding stronger protection. But creating a no-fly zone could transform the conflict into a direct Russia-NATO war, exactly what both sides have tried to avoid since day one. Some argue for a middle path. Expand Ukraine's own air defense systems, supplied by NATO countries, so Kyiv can effectively build its own de facto no-fly zone. This would avoid NATO jets entering Ukrainian skies, while still providing protection. Others say the alliance should explore new technologies, like drone-and-drone interceptors or electronic warfare, to counter Russia's swarms more cost-effectively. But whatever the choice, one thing is clear. Russia's incursion into NATO skies has shifted the debate. What was once unthinkable is now openly on the table. What about Ukraine itself? Did Kyiv agree to a no-fly zone? The answer is an emphatic yes. Since the earliest days of the war, President Volodymyr Zelensky has pleaded for the West to close the skies. In a March 2022 address to the US Congress, he declared, "To establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine is to save people. A humanitarian no-fly zone. Conditions under which Russia will no longer be able to terrorize our peaceful cities every day and night." For Ukraine, the skies remain its greatest vulnerability. Whether it's missiles, glide bombs, or drones, Russia's air campaign has inflicted enormous suffering. Kyiv would welcome any measure that shields its population, but NATO's hesitation remains. So maybe this was Putin's plan all along. It's by sending drones into Poland and Romania, Russia didn't intend to destroy. It intended to provoke. A handful of drones, unarmed, enough to cause fear but not war.